And I really
can't
stand it.
Because it's an insult to the intelligence of the interviewer.
Exactly.
And they know what they do, and the interviewers know as well.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what they're going to be. Or so we think.
Yes, and so we give ourselves the kind of get out of jail free card of like, oh, well, I don't know what the questions are going to be, so I just have to wing it. Yeah.
He's got a joke about, I'll tell you what cleaners did. I haven't got a joke for it, but Dan has loads of random ones.
They wipe the floor with you.
So if I were to say anything, I would say, yeah, there you go. Went straight over my head.
Or in the news, like really sensational, like very Jeremy Vine world of like, oh, we're going to be backed into a corner and we're going to be, you know...
Gotcha questions.
That's what I mean. Yeah, absolutely. Like the aha moments. But in work, and you get asked about things like, oh, when are you going to have a baby? Or, you know, personal questions like that. It is against the law to be asked certain questions. Around on a music box. Okay. Oh.
What film is that?
I didn't realise we started.
What film is that? Bedknobs and Broomsticks? No. You know what? Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
What's the one with the child snatcher in?
What a mad film that is. There's a thing on the end. What is a bed knob? I hear you ask. It's a thing at the end of the bed. Why is it there? Have you seen that film? Bedknobs and Broomsticks?
What?
Have you seen that film?
What are we talking about?
Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
Yes, I've seen that film.
It's a bed knob. What is a bed knob though?
The little...
But why would you want to take that off? And what is it? Why is it there?
Maybe it's just...
That was one of the questions I was once asked. Because this podcast is about what if I'm asked a question I don't know the answer to.
There was a lot of questions there that I didn't know the answer to, I have to say.
A plethora of questions.
I still want to know where the child catcher's from. Is that Bedknobs and Broomsticks? No,
Chitty
that's
Bang
from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Is that where this doll is from?
The doll is from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Yeah, she's a doll.
I genuinely didn't know the answer to that and felt a little bit cornered.
Child catcher, that's a weird character.
Oof.
Dark.
Do you feel like when you don't know an answer...
And I feel like the child catcher.
The child catcher's waiting in the wings.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's a good one.
Children.
Oh. What a weird character.
Horrible. But I do feel like that impending sense of doom is akin to watching something like The Child Catcher.
Tis.
As a kid.
Tis.
Was it because I said akin?
No, I'm just agreeing with you. Speaking of that, the Wheelers in Return to Oz. Now, not many people know there's The Wizard of Oz and then The Return to Oz, which is the sequel in the 70s, I think it was filmed. That's a dark film. And the Emerald City has been it's just ruins. And there's these creatures that are on wheels and they're like these skatery type things. And they all work for the Gnome King, who's this like weird rock king. Anyway, they're kind of the Wizard of Oz version of the Child Catcher. Anyway, asking questions in public speak. I'm not okay. I know that's the question you're wanting to ask, and I will answer it. No.
Do you know what comes next, Luke?
No idea. So, asking questions in public speaking, I don't know if this is something I ever considered until it happened to me.
I feel the same.
And it's probably things that happen when it comes to things, most commonly things like panel discussions, or you're doing a talk, or you're doing a presentation.
Or a job interview.
Or a job interview. Yeah, it could be any of those things. Sometimes it happens right at the end, and it's a bit of an afterthought.
Or a date.
Or a date. It could be a date. And what if they ask a question? I guess if you have in your mind that you are prepared that a question is going to be asked, I guess that's the first hurdle. Some people don't realise they're going to be asked.
I feel like there's this... It's a little bit funny, isn't it? Because we all know that people are going to ask questions, but we never actually think about what's going to happen after questions that they ask the question. Yeah. We don't actually... I feel like when you're preparing, you think, oh, and then there'll probably be some questions. And we just leave that into the abyss.
Because we don't know what they're going to be. Or so we think.
Yes, and so we give ourselves the kind of get out of jail free card of like, oh, well, I don't know what the questions are going to be, so I just have to wing it, they say. Now, there are loads of questions that we can anticipate, right? I remember this actually I went to Birkbeck College, it's a university in London, to do my master's in theatre directing. Now, I didn't know anything about Birkbeck before, really. I didn't know much about it. And so luckily I was put in touch with someone who was already there on the course. And so I said, oh, what kind of tips do you have? And she said, be prepared for the questions. And I was like, oh yeah, I didn't really think about this. She said, they will ask you questions like, what actor would you play as Lady Macbeth? What performer, what 3 performers would you have as Macbeth? How would you like to do the staging? Like all of these really obvious things.
Practical stuff.
Practical questions, like low-hanging fruit questions that I didn't prepare up until meeting her, because I thought, oh, well, I won't know what questions they're going to ask. Of course, they're really simple questions. They're like really run-of-the-mill questions that I could have just sat down and with a bit more thought, I would have thought, well, I'm applying to be a theatre director. So they're probably going to ask me questions about theatre directing. What approach would you use? What would rehearsals look like? Are you going to use a lighting designer? What would they do? What's your kind of ideas of themes or, all those sorts of things? And until that moment, I hadn't even thought about it. So then when I went off and prepped that, I think that's the reason I got in on this really, as I learned, very prestigious course. There was only 7 of us that got in, or 8 of us that got in that year. And I was the only woman. And so I honestly think that was the cut above that got me through the doors, because I didn't have loads of experience and stuff like that. So answering those questions really helped.
Absolutely. And people think they don't know what the questions are going to be. But I think if you're smart about it, you can kind of work it out. Like, for example, when my old work, we used to get a lot of young people coming in wanting to do internships, work placements, work experience, that sort of thing. And one of the questions that, not me, but my boss would always ask people is, have you seen the programs we make? Have you seen the shows? Have you seen the TVs, the channel? Have you seen the channel at all? And you would be amazed the amount of people who say, I've not watched it. The amount
just gives it away
of people who haven't done it.
Yeah.
And he would kind of go,
just like, I want to be on TV.
I'm going to give you a bit of a lesson here. You can't turn up to an interview or a thing and not having seen it. I know who you are. You can Google us. Like, there's no excuses anymore. On the bus on the way here, I was quite lucky that I don't know how I knew this. I think I knew they were going to ask me what my favourite programme was. So I watched some of them.
And you were like, Cardiff TV.
And I said, yeah, how did you know it was Cardiff TV? It could have been a different job.
Ooh.
It was Cardiff TV. And there was one random programme they had about cooking, and Sian Bassett Roberts made like a lovely lamb curry. So I went, yes, I love the curry episode. I
particularly loved the curry episode. The
cooking.
niche.
And
Cooking with Sian.
So niche. And then like a year later, I said, did you know I was lying? And he went, well, I knew that you didn't really care about that programme, but I'm glad you made an effort to research.
I admired you for making it, yeah.
So when it comes to, we don't know what kind of questions people are going to ask. Another example, okay, I was recently interviewed for Welsh News for my history videos.
Oh, yeah.
And if I can, I think it's always better to know the questions beforehand, if you can.
That's something you can do.
I asked my agent, can you ask them what they're going to ask? And instead of saying these are the questions, it was something like, we're going to ask something along the lines of bang, 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 bang. So I almost wrote, I know you shouldn't write a script as such, so I wrote like points I was going to make, or like themes I was going to have. But there's obviously some questions that I didn't know they were going to ask. So what I have then, on a separate bit of paper, I have like 10 stock answers. So for example, say if someone said to me, Luke, what is your favourite part about Welsh history? And on a bit of paper, I don't have, this answer is for, what is your favourite part of Welsh history? I just have 5 moments in history I really enjoy. So I could say as an answer, I don't have a favourite, but one of the things I really like, and I've already prepared the answer before, even if it's something a little bit niche. Luke, how did you get into this kind of thing? Oh, that's quite an easy one. If it's something like, how long does it take you to prepare for that? Maybe I'm not prepared for that specific question, but I have my process. So I could say, it takes quite a long time. One of the things I do is I research this. So I almost have answers that could answer 5 different questions. So as long as you have some of these in the back of your head, like with job interviews, the common ones are going to be like things about your personality, your hobbies, what you do outside of work, skills you have.
That's what I was going to say. There's definitely, like, when it comes to interview, like, let's just come up with some now. Like, what are some of the classic interview questions? What are your weaknesses?
Yeah,
people love that one. tell me about what are your weaknesses. My weakness is I'm a perfectionist.
That's a really common one, isn't it?
I know, it's funny, isn't it?
Because it's like a humble, it's actually positive, but wrapped up with something bad.
I know, they're like, this'll get them. It's quite funny. But what are your weaknesses? Why did you leave your last job? Think of any more. Have you not had that many interviews?
Oh, yeah. Well, what do you like to do for fun?
What do you like to do outside of work?
Who's your inspiration?
Who's your inspiration?
How did you hear about this? Or another one is, why do you want to work here?
Why do you want to apply? Absolutely.
And sometimes maybe it's a job you don't really need. Maybe you just need the cash. And they maybe know that. But you could say something like, if you don't like the subject, say you're applying to work in a frozen yogurt factory and you don't like frozen yogurt, you could say, the skills I'd love to develop in this job is something I really have wanted to develop for some time. You could do that kind of thing.
The flexibility really appeals because you do 0-hour contracts or whatever. Like, I really need something like that, but it'll complement this that I do. So then they're kind of going, oh, well, okay, they're a person who, that would fit rather than them feeling really annoyed about a 0-hour contract or whatever, isn't it? But I'm thinking about the thing that you said about the interviews where Dan has people come in saying that they hadn't watched the programme, right? Mm-hmm. This comes back to prepping for drama school. A super simple thing that you should prep. What's the last play you saw?
Yeah.
And I remember just being like, oh my goodness me, I've never seen a play. And I remember in one of my auditions saying I saw a play and it was honestly from like 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's the only one I can remember. So rehearsing, even just having them in the back of your mind, not these polished answers, but like it's literally like when someone says, what's your favourite band, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think this works really well for dates as well. A lot of people are like, oh, what do you like to do outside of work? And you're like,
yeah,
I've forgotten all my life and hobbies and I'm really dull and this moment needs to evaporate.
Absolutely. You can also have questions which you can use after you answer a question as well. So you could say something like, so I actually did this when I did, I was going for a job or other, I can't remember what it was now. And they were asking me questions and they were interested in me. And at the end of it went, so this is why I would love to do this opportunity. Can I ask, why did you want to have a chat with me?
Yeah.
And then it kind of, it's almost like not putting the pressure back on them, but it shows that you're interested in what they have to say.
It's a conversation,
And it just flows a bit nicer.
Yeah, rather than waiting till the end where they go, do you have any questions for us? Actually, you've just made it more of a conversation then.
And have yes, and some people don't have questions. I would say always have questions.
Always have it. What's it like to work here? What keeps you? How long have you worked here? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I would say also something that's not to do with the work itself, like you just said. If you can, try and make it something about, the office isn't where's good to get lunch, something like that.
Yeah.
To leave it on a nice, friendly note as well. It kind of is a nice palate cleanser. But when it comes to people asking questions, there's loads of like techniques and things you can do, but some of the things that I've had or experiences that I've had was when I was doing the BBC tour on the schools. So I went to loads of schools, and at the end we have a Q&A session. And equally, I think if you're really good at handling questions, this is my personal opinion, I think that is some of the most impressive work you can do as a speaker.
Handling questions.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Unpredictable. And it shows you can think on your feet. Look at some of the most viral videos of comedians at the minute. It's all crowd work. All of it is crowd work. There's one really good guy, I can't remember his name, Matt something. He's a young, quite good looking chap, late 20s. He's massive in America. His crowd interaction is some of the best I've seen because it's quick and it's, for me, that sparks of talent. Yeah, preparing a speech is really good and all that. But, and I'm not saying that everyone should be that level. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that answering questions well is a craft that I think people should be encouraged to get good at. So, for example, when I was doing the BBC job, and because it's children as well, they would ask some bizarre questions. There was one kid, bless him, he didn't understand the concept of Q&A. He didn't really get it. So he had the microphone in the crowd. Yes, what is your name? Oh, Billy. Hi, Billy. So what is your question, please, Billy? And he was like, Billy, look, you can ask whatever you like. It could be your favourite colour, it could be your favourite sport, and you can ask whatever you want. And he turned to his mate and went, John, do you like football? He asked his mate, and I went, John, do you like football? I just kind of turned it back to him. But what I'm trying to say is that sometimes it's unpredictable. And I think owning when you don't know the answer I think is better than winging it personally. And we spoke about this earlier. There's lots of techniques you can do. Some, for example, I don't know the answer to this now. I could sit here and think about it, but I'm aware of time, and I'm sure there's other people here who want to ask questions. So let's park that question for a second, and afterwards, if there's time, let's have a chat, and we can try and find an answer together. Does that sound okay with you?
Yeah.
And they will, and I think that's a much better way, because some people just try and flaunt it and BS their way through an answer.
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because the way that you handle questions absolutely elevates your credibility. But then also, sometimes we want that credibility a little bit too much.
Oh my gosh.
We're desperate for it. So we want to be good at questions.
Yeah.
And you kind of strangle the joy out of that opportunity. It's got to be quite playful, hasn't it? I don't mean in the attitude where you take it for granted. It's got to have that flexibility. So there was this exercise that I learned years ago, which is a really beautiful example of not being, why it's not great to be like too desperate for something. So you've got two people. One person stood and the other person is holding their arm just by their wrists, okay? 2 hands on the wrists. The first time you say to the person who stood, whose arm is being held, you really want the sweet in your pocket. So they have to really struggle, and the other person has to hold them back, okay, from getting the sweet in the pocket. They have to really struggle, and they normally hurt themselves. There's redness on their arm, everything. Now, the second time you do this exercise, you say to the person who's going to try and put their hand in their pocket, this time, you want the sweet, but how you get there is up for grabs. And actually, I want you to have a lightness about getting there. And the other person just still has to stop them getting their hand in their pocket. Second time, it's like magic. They always win, the person who wants to get the sweet, if they've got the right kind of attitude. And they do it with ease, and the other person is exhausted. And there's no redness on their arm. They've not hurt themselves this time. It's just a perspective shift of not wanting it too much. And kind of then they start feeling, they start working with the flexibility of the other person.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like, I don't know, like a martial art or whatever, isn't it? Where they suddenly see all of the opportunities. They become like awakened to it. So I think that's a little bit like asking and answering questions. Is sometimes if you think, right, I'm going to answer these questions, they're going to be about this, and this is how I'm going to really rehearse it. Yeah. It's going to be perfect, and no one's going to interrupt me. That's when you get the, oh my gosh, someone's asked a question and I'm not prepared for it, and you start to really get tense.
Yeah.
Now, if you think we're going to have a little bit of preparation, I'm going to have some curveballs come my way maybe. If you're prepared in that way, you're way more likely to have a sort of gift in that moment and think, oh, I can get the sweet in the pocket. It's not how I thought I was going to get there.
Yeah.
But there's maybe this or something better, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you're open to more opportunities.
Yes. And is that, so you're saying like relaxing into it?
I think that's the
quite
attitude.
a nice way.
Yeah, it's the attitude you take, the flexibility.
Another thing I've seen some people do really well is someone asks a question, you say, you know what? I know who would be really good at answering this. I may not know this answer to this question, but Claire over there, she's got 20 years of experience. Maybe if you were to have a chat, she'd be better equipped, because that also shows a bit of humility, and it shows that you're happy to share that kind of spotlight with someone else. Another thing I find quite useful is a lot of people use this phrase. So ask me quite a complicated question. Or it's not complicated. Ask me a question.
How do you send a rocket to the moon?
Charlotte, that is a really good question. And people usually do that, number one, to give them a compliment so they feel good about themselves. So regardless of what I say, you already feel good. So it's going to kind of soften the blow if my answer isn't very good. Another reason why people do it is it gives time for me to think of an answer to that question. Another way you could do it...
by slowing it down.
That's a really good question. Or what I would say is that people use that quite a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a fine line.
I personally don't like using it.
Yeah.
Some people may like using it. I find it sometimes a bit overused. This is
feels
what
a bit,
I quite like to do. So if you ask me a question, I sometimes do this just to give myself a bit more time and to give them respect.
How do you spell Mississippi?
How do I spell Mississippi? What's your name again?
Charlotte.
Charlotte, nice to meet you. Just so I'm getting this right, are you asking me to spell the state in America, Mississippi? Yeah, just to make sure I'm getting that right. Okay, great, thank you. So Mississippi is M-I-S. I can't spell Mississippi.
M-I-S-S-I-S-S-I-P-P-I.
So
I said pie, but you know,
what
the
that
last is
what that does, what that does is it kind of, I'm making sure that I'm answering the question correctly, because often people answer something and they get misconstrued, and people often go, and also what I quite like to do is I answer and I go, does that answer your question? Just to make sure that I'm getting that right.
Yeah.
And usually they say, yeah, because you've clarified before. So you can use that as a bit of a buffer.
As a bookend.
Instead of going, that is a really good question. Ask their name, say hello, repeat the question and say, am I getting this right? That you want me to answer this question? Is that right? Yeah.
I think you do that really well. Like you kind of overemphasized it there and slowed it right down. Normally you do that really quickly and it's very natural.
Yeah.
I think you do that so well. And we're in a world at the moment where it's very reactive. And so I think that technique is needed more than ever to go, just so I'm getting this right. Is this what you mean? Can I just, so that's the sort of reflecting it back to them. And actually that can work. Like you don't have to wait to use something like that. You can use that in your relationships. I think that's so beautiful in a relationship to go, am I getting this right? Are you cross about, are you cross that I didn't put the rubbish out on time? Or is there something else that you'd like to chat about? Or, can I rephrase that? Are you saying this? Or can I just make sure I'm understanding? I think that sort of active listening is absolutely something that people can go and use like now, like with children or their families or their relationships, whatever. And then when you're in those spaces where questions are flying around and you're thinking, oh gosh, am I going to get this right? Ask if you've interpreted it right first. That's great.
If you've interpreted it
right. Interpreted.
You can also ask them back, how would you spell Mississippi? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
And with children, sometimes they feel so scared about asking questions. They ask a question and then you start answering and then they get distracted by something else. They're speaking to their mate. And sometimes I've gone, Jacob, how do you spell Mississippi? And they're like eating their sandwich and then someone nudges them and he goes, what? And I go, Jacob, I was answering your question there and you were listening to it. That's one of the, and obviously you don't want to do that with your boss if they're like, you're wondering, well, excuse me, boss, I'm answering your question. But it's supposed to be a question. It's supposed to be a conversation with you and the question asker. Some people, I think, feel they have to do this performative thing to the rest of the group. Why not make it about, this is you and me right now, I'm answering your question, and then zoom back out to the crowd. It's almost a cool, intimate moment that... Yeah.
So actually, this is a question for you. Have you seen questions being asked in a way that you answered that you don't think works? You don't think it works?
Yeah, I've seen people, okay, I don't want to name this person because I don't want to make people feel embarrassed, but when people sometimes answer a question and they get maybe defensive, or when they try and BS their way around the answer, or they answer way too quickly. Some of the best answers of people is when they take a moment, pause. But you say we live in such a reactive world where people go, yeah, great. So what I think about this is, and they just say, instead of the best thing to say, they say the first thing on their mind.
Yeah.
I saw one example where it was just before COVID and there was someone from the NHS, one of the bosses, and we were in a big conference room, a press conference room in the Welsh Government, and I was there at the back of the room, and one of my friends, Dan Bevan, who's a journalist, asked a question to the person, and he said, how many cases are in England, or whatever it was, or in Britain? And the person from the NHS said, there are, 300 cases in the UK, whatever it was. And the journalist, my friend, said, I think you'll actually find it's 420 or whatever it was. And the person on the platform said, well, to be fair, I don't have the power of Google in my hand. What he was basically saying was, you're being a bit, antagonistic right now. I will put you in your place. What I think would have been better is if he went, 420, I didn't know that. Thank you for letting me know. The last report I saw was 300. I can obviously see you've been updated, minute by minute there. Thank you for that information. Any more questions? Instead, he went, I can't get information. You're being a bit uppity. And I don't think that was handled incredibly well. And that press conference was so important. And he said so many things. That is the only thing I can remember from that press conference was that moment.
Really?
And I went, it just kind of rocked me a bit. I went, I don't know. I can see he's probably stressed. I get it. I understand it. But
that's really hard. That's a really good example of like those instances where, you know, everything around that time was very reactive.
absolutely.
And everyone was really having to think on their feet. And I think that's a product of, you know, again, like there was so much sensational journalism around there. I'm not saying that your friend was part of that, but it was, they probably had a bit of a minefield at that time, and that was really hard.
Yeah.
You know, at that point, I think sometimes you think, wow, that's a really harsh way of answering that question. But sometimes that comes from assertiveness, is like, that's not what we're here to talk about. Maybe that would be a better way of, look, I'm not going to dispute figures right now. We have, there's updates available, XYZ. Like, there's something that politicians are taught to do in media training, which is steering.
Oh.
And I really cannot stand it.
Because it's an insult to the intelligence of the interviewer.
Exactly.
And they know what they do, and the interviewers know as well.
Yeah. But what I would say is there's a difference between steering for your own gain and steering to keep the topic on track.
That's different.
That's very different.
Yes.
So what I would say is, maybe in that circumstance where you have the person from the NHS or whatever on stage, they could have used it as an opportunity to say, this is how we're on track. Look, the numbers are changing all the time. Where there's plenty of platforms that have an up-to-date blah, blah, blah. What I want to talk about next is XYZ.
Yeah.
Like, so you're still honouring the question. But what tends to happen is steering is something like, I'm glad that you've brought up something completely irrelevant and actually that you didn't bring up. We're going to go down that avenue. And that is super frustrating. And there was someone on YouTube actually, it was like how to answer any question with confidence for the rest of your life. You know, it's really sensational. And that's what they advise to do. So like, we can use steering. And I thought, wow, that's really where we're going to start failing people, is if everyone was steering. Can you imagine if everyone did that? Everyone was steering.
Nothing get done.
Like, imagine in our relationships, we're like, you didn't put the bins out.
Well, what I have done is I cleaned the cupboards last night, and that's the really important thing in a relationship, is the cupboards are clean.
Whataboutisms.
Whataboutisms.
Yeah, exactly. So I worry. I think they can be, if we embrace the vulnerability of asking and answering questions with a little bit more softness and a little bit more grace towards ourselves and the person asking, that's where we find a little bit, again, like the sweet in the pocket. We need to work with the flexibility of the other person. It's a bit of a dance, isn't it?
It's a bit of a dance. Be flexible. And also, we're human beings, not search engines.
There's
nothing wrong with saying, you know what? I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. But I can find out.
That was a huge takeaway on my course. They said, please say when you don't know something. And that is honestly so great when someone admits that they don't know something and they go, I don't know, we'll find it out together. I've done that loads actually as a director. I think that was one of the biggest lessons from Birkbeck. Say when you don't know something. And it's the scariest thing to do, but also the most empowering thing. So if someone says, well, what, you know, like scene 4, how are we going to bring it to life? How are we going to do X, Y, Z? I'm like, what do you think? It's not because I don't have ideas, but I'm like, actually, 5 people's minds are better than one. Now, if I've got a strong idea that I've really thought about for a long time and whatever, I'm going to fight for that idea because I think it's strong. But I will fight with people rather than just having that sort of like dog paw on top of them and be like, this is the way it's going to be. So I think it does open up to collaboration really, really well when you say, I'm not really, I don't know.
Absolutely, yeah. And if it's a question, I think it depends on the context. Some situations you're going to be able to get the questions beforehand, like we said earlier. Some things, maybe it's like a live setting, you may not know. One place where I've seen more and more people do audience interaction well and badly, by the way, is this is a weird example, TikTok Live. So TikTok Live, if you have the confidence to do it, is a great way to practice on the spotness, because whether you like it or not, the comment section of social media can be very, very dark, ugly, honest place. So if you're talking about, I don't know, selling, so you go live and you go like, let's do a Q&A, ask whatever you want. The comments are going to come in thick and fast, usually. It depends how many followers you got. And that is probably a really good way to practice answering questions quite quickly and honestly.
And also maybe filtering them, because you actually don't always need to answer every question. Some are inappropriate. Some aren't.
Oh yeah, of course.
Some aren't connected to that subject matter. Some are a flight from task. You know, you can mitigate against this saying, write down your questions on the way in. Or I actually think not a lot of people know this about things like going on the radio, going on TV, being asked to be on a news feature. You are entitled to ask what sort of questions they're going to ask. Podcasts, the amount of times where they're, I'm going on someone's podcast, I don't know what they're going to ask. Ask. What sort of things do you want to ask me? Because also it makes the podcaster, the host, prepare and think, actually, do you know what? If they come back to you and go, I'm not really sure, I just really like the way that you talk about XYZ, then you can go, well, actually, I want to talk about, you know, ABC.
Yeah.
How do we bring those two together? You can have a bit of a plan. It's not disingenuous. It's preparing well. But I think a lot of people think, it's up to the gods. I don't know what sort of questions they're going to ask. What sort of questions would you like to be asked? You know, if you were invited onto a podcast and someone said, I'll be honest with you, I don't know what questions we're going to ask you. Be like, well, this is what I'd love. In a dream world, this is what I would love to be asked.
Absolutely. Yeah,
because imagine if you went on a book tour, you'd written a book. Sorry to interrupt. You've written a book and then someone doesn't ask you about the book and you're like, but I'm on a book tour.
So people don't think they have the power to do that kind of thing.
Exactly.
And I think what doesn't help is that we have this idea that people are naturally good at answering questions. But so one of my good friends works for Wales Online, and when he interviews a celebrity and they come onto his podcast or when they come and have a chat with him, there's a PR company who usually say to Sam, right, you can ask questions about this. This person can't answer questions about this. So the parameters are already set. So when it comes to the interview, there's already that prep done beforehand. So when people go, gosh, did you see Spielberg on the news last night? He was so free with his answers. Yeah, because he knew what they were going to talk about.
He knew the subject area.
With Graham Norton, they're all prepped beforehand what they're going to say and what they can say.
The stories.
And they all prep beforehand. People think they're off the cuff because it's part of the craft of entertainment and all that. So I don't think it does. And that's why when Sam asks my mate, he sometimes throws in curveballs because he's quite cheeky in a good way. He throws in curveballs, and I've seen the clips of celebs. They're going, I wasn't ready for that. So even A-listers, top actors and entertainers struggle with questions they're not ready for. So of course we're all going to have a bit of a hard time with it.
Yeah.
So what my point is, trying to beat yourself up over it.
Yeah.
Because answering hard questions off the cuff is a skill.
And it's actually what you've touched on there is about the expectations that we set as well. It's good to set some and boundaries and go, I'll answer this, and this, and I won't answer about this and whatever. And we've seen it in those junkets, right? Where people are asked a question and they're like, yeah, I'd prefer not to answer that. That's fine. That is absolutely your right to say that's something. Like, remember, like people say no comment all the time. You're not going to get to that. You're not going to get to that point. Like, I think at the moment we've got on TV a lot of kind of, or in the news, like really sensational, like very Jeremy Vine world of like, we're going to be backed into a corner and we're going to be,
gotcha questions.
That's what I mean. Yeah, absolutely. Like the aha moments. But for most people, we're not in that environment. We're not having to have the gotcha questions because we're just asking questions in a boardroom about, the last quarter or something. So it's, I think because there's so much in the world around that at the moment with gotcha and sensationalism. We're almost taking that in and embodying it a bit too much. Whereas actually the questions are going to be, hopefully, from a point of generosity, curiosity, and to get everyone on board a little bit easier, right?
You can ask people to clarify their questions too.
Yes,
People
this
don't
is a
do that
great
enough, I don't think.
technique.
They
Yeah.
go, what do you mean by that? Can you expand on that?
Yeah.
Or something. But going back to you said about the gotcha thing, there's another example of when Robert Downey Jr. was interviewed on, I think that was Channel 4, and they started talking about his drug and alcohol past. And it was linking to one of the movies he was doing. I'm not sure if it was in the Marvel movies or not. And he stopped the interview and he went, What are we doing?
Yeah.
And he said, the interviewer said, I'm just asking you questions. He went, nah, I'm not doing that. And he walked
Yeah.
out. So the point is that you are within your right, as you say, to answer whatever question you like. And although if it's a boardroom meeting and they're asking you about figures in the latest quarter, then it may feel a bit weird for you to say, I'm not comfortable answering that question.
But they were asking about something personal.
Yes,
exactly. And
exactly.
actually, again, it is within your rights.
In that context, yes.
Like, I think, and I cannot believe this still goes on, and this is where this sort of preparation becomes very life-changing. So we've sort of talked about a lot of these topics very lightly as like, oh, this is how you prepare and whatever. Actually, if you're a woman in work and you get asked about things like, oh, when are you going to have a baby? Or, personal questions like that, it is against the law to be asked certain questions like that about your personal life, especially when it comes to maternity and pregnancy and all of that sex-based ethics code. So actually being prepared for moments like that where you say, I'm not going to talk about that, or things like, menopause or certain medical treatments that you're going through, there's actually a huge world of rights that you could dip into and be prepared for. Say if you were thinking of having children or whatever, and you're nervous that your boss might get a little bit like, oh gosh, yeah, maybe we should sack them before they get pregnant, all these sorts of things. There are things in place to protect you. So being prepared for those sorts of questions, saying, actually, that's not something I'm ready to discuss, or that's not something I am willing to discuss, can put you in good stead for those sorts of worlds as well, where it is actually quite life-changing. And for those actors, that's probably, where they have that hard and fast boundary. But yeah, clarifying their question is always a really, really good tool.
Yeah.
Can I just understand whether this is what you're asking? They did that actually at the Youth Speaks competition really, really well. So there was a chairperson and then the opposer and proposer.
Yeah.
And the chairperson, what one of them did really beautifully was when there was a question from the floor, he repeated it and reflected it back and did exactly what you said. Like, can I just check? And they were like 16.
Yeah.
I thought that was amazing that they were able to do that. And a lot of adults don't have the confidence to take a moment, digest the question, and just reflect it back. Can I make sure I've got this right?
Yeah, I think reactive is the key word. And we don't have to be.
It's not tennis.
It's not tennis.
If they serve, you can let the ball drop a little bit and be like, okay, let me just write that down.
And I think
just take a moment.
The way modern media is framed isn't geared up to having a good coherent conversation.
No,
like the way
it's transactional.
It's transactional, and also I think it's I think that's why the mediums like podcasting is actually a really important medium, because you can have a conversation with someone long form, whereas in traditional TV, terrestrial TV, and I think we're moving away from that now because people can't be bothered with it. You have a really, really, really short space of time to convey something that is quite complicated and nuanced, and people will
soundbite.
Oh my god, yeah! People just want the ratings and they want the views. So if you just have that at the back of your head, that like I know in news organizations, they almost have like apps which are like league tables of how many people have seen your articles, yeah. And I can't speak for all journalists, but I know there are a proportion of journalists whose main priority is getting to the top of that leaderboard. So when I ask you a question about you being a public speaking coach, I'm thinking, what answer can Charlotte give that will get most people to click on my article? Will it be, how can you help people most in your job? Or will it be, so Charlotte thinking of having a baby soon, when's that going to happen soon? Like, it's that personal stuff and things that may make you feel quite uncomfortable. So there's no wonder that people, when it comes to questions, that have maybe their guard up.
Yeah, because we're looking at those examples, right?
Exactly. We're seeing them all the time. So if you're aware that, if you're confident in your ability to have boundaries in that world as well, and at the same time understanding that it's a craft, that when stand-up comedians do it, it's a developed thing. And I think if you can do it well, by the way, I think it can be the most impressive thing anyone can ever do, because it's unpredictable.
Yeah. And actually, what do you think? I've got an idea for something that people can do as if they're listening to this episode and they're like, gosh, yeah, that is something that I'm really afraid of. Personally, I would say get a pen and paper, or write this in your notes, and just think of 3 people that you're comfortable with, that you could almost have like a little Q&A session with. So the next time you do a talk or presentation, whatever, you're like, can I just ask you for all the questions that you could ask? Or do it with your partner or your colleague, or someone that is willing to just spend a bit of time writing, okay, what 10 questions come to mind straight away, and can we role play them? Because that's a lot of, what my job is, being the sort of vocal audience member. Well, how do you do this? Well, what do you think about this? And because a lot of the topics that my clients talk about, I don't have a connection to, I ask the sort of silly questions in inverted commas. So that would be my tip, is to kind of grab those 3 people and just have them in your phone and think, oh, right, okay, could we do that for each other in our work?
That's a really nice tip. I would add to that.
Yeah.
And I would say that try and get a list of questions on a bit of paper and practice answering them in a coherent, nice, calm manner. And that'll take a bit of work, but you could probably get like random question generators online.
Probably do it from like ChatGPT or something, isn't it? Yeah.
Like,
write your summary and then come up with 10 questions.
Yeah, and start with quite broad things, maybe go into things that you're interested in. So, for example, I love history. So I know in life, I'll probably get asked things like, what's your favourite era of history?
Yeah.
Who's your favourite king?
Yeah.
What's the most interesting war to you in history?
Yeah.
I can have those answers as almost stock phrases. My good friend Dan does this incredibly well. He was a stand-up comedian for years, still does stand-up. He's got a joke about almost every topic in the world, just in his back pocket. So when he's in a Q&A environment...
You're giving it away now.
I know, sorry. Say someone brings up the I don't know, subject of cleaners.
Yeah.
He's got a joke about, I'll tell you what cleaners did. I haven't got a joke for it, but Dan has loads of random ones.
They wipe the floor with you.
So if I were to say anything, I would say, yeah, there you go. Went straight over my head. I would say, just like, again, linking to a practice podcast, is maybe start with 10 questions that you think to yourself you're most likely to be asked in your life, and just practice 30-second answers to those and take it from there. And just, at least then you've got that kind of muscle memory a little bit. You did it with me. I was quite nervous about doing replacements in rugby. So when you do replacements announcing, you got to get it quite quick. So you got to say, coming onto the pitch, number 20, Charlotte Lewis, replacing number 9, Luke Davis. And you got to do it quite quick.
Yeah.
And because numbers flip up for me sometimes in my head, I had to practice that with you.
Yeah, so we did a bit of improv with that, didn't we?
You were saying to me, coming on 20, coming off 21 or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was just like bam. And after a while, I got really used to it.
Yeah.
But that
it's
just
that
comes
muscle
with practice.
Yeah, it's exactly the same as asking and answering questions. And I think if you can find someone to do that with, whether it's a coach or whether it's just someone in your life, or whether you record the questions and then you answer them.
Yeah.
It will stand you in such good stead.
Such good stead indeed. I've got a question for you. Should we end it there?
Yeah, let's end it there.
Great.
I knew the answer to that one.
Wonderful.